Story time. It's 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 story time. Okay, we are back for episode 15. I'm pretty sure episode 15. We just came from the struggle in our last episode where we dealt with the me, myself, and I's, the past, the present, the future, and the kind of wrestling match between the three and the entire environment in which you are encased in, or you are hearthed in, or you are surrounded by. That is your fireplace, the place where you burn, the place where you light your fire, the place where you can also deplete yourself like wood in a fireplace, if not tended to, consciously and responsibly. But coming from the struggle, we are now ready to meet the process towards, for lack of a better word, enlightenment, a place where I acknowledge or identify the parts of myself that are the root of the problem, even if just the very tip of the root of the problem, just the beginning of the journey of actually accessing a tangible piece of the problem that I could get or get a grip of and harness in some way in order to inspire any sort of significant change, and appropriately this stage of development that is illustrated in this piece is titled A Higher Self. And I'm off and on with these acronyms, but this was one of those pieces where I started playing around with more wordplay and also incorporating acronym wordplay. And in this one, I had my first real like huh, like the ooh and the like the of the ooh, like a tone of realization or admiration, like or like almost a startled. It's a primal tone, but it says a lot, and there's, depending on the specific tone of said tone, it can change. The ahs can be scary, the ahs can be enlightening, the ahs can be satisfactory or comforting. But in this case, I was going through a lot of the ahs of my life, whether it was good Oz or bad Oz, I was getting a lot of them all at once. These epiphanies. But before I proceed with what this all means to me now, and also what I remember this to mean to me at the moment, I'm going to do my standard segments that I do before I rant about each next piece, and that is my randomly generated question, which is meant to just loosen up the lips, just get me gabbing, make me think not less of myself, but to just just stop thinking so much about what's going on and just express, because I'm not so great with words. So I'm trying to answer simpler questions before I answer the question that I try to answer in each previous episode. Like, what is this about? And what does it mean? These are short but very significant questions to me. But a question like this will be a little easier to answer. Sort of. The question I got today is, what is something that happened to you that you can't logically explain? So, as you may have seen in previous episodes, or if you know of my work and kind of where I am now and what I really prioritize in terms of my body of work and my style and the structures and symbols that I kind of manifest, you obviously, if that's the case, you obviously know of my Peibis. And if you've been watching these episodes up until the end, you're seeing my Peibis kind of play out these simple but symbolic scenes that hold meaning to me and may hold meaning to you. But it's just almost like a bonsai-esque diary where I can speak in encrypted ways through, and in an innocent manner, through these little figures that come into my life via my art process. They just kind of stand up and say, "Hey, what's up? Me." And then they play their parts. But and I'm setting you up this way because I could answer this question in a million different ways, because I've had a lot of weird, strange things happening. Not even just like what we're looking at right here. It doesn't make sense, like, especially in hindsight. In the moment, everything makes sense because I'm making the marks, but in hindsight, I'm like, oh man, what have I done? Like, why? Like who would spend this much time? Like, this is not logical. But that's passion half the time. It doesn't have real logic. It has like an ephemeral essence that is just more of a weather pattern than like anything else, or I mean more of like a natural phenomenon that we really don't have the answers to. We can wrap our minds around them in a certain rudimentary way, but we don't actually know why this all happens the way it does. But all that aside, one of my earliest experiences with Peibis that I find to be very illogical, or I can't find a logical explanation for why it happened this way, but because it played out this way, it made me so much more fascinated with what could proceed in the future because of these figures. For me, for others, for a community, for people beyond my life, like what sort of moments will people have with these? And it really introduced me to a very personal level of synchronicity, which is a huge inspiration that we'll see more and more of as these works progress into the Peillustrations. I use a lot of my synchronistic symbols and numbers and patterns to reflect on in sync moments that I have with my journey through life. Moments that I think more people around should be aware of, or not just like shake them off. Like they should interpret these moments and not take everything for coincidence. Coincidence and synchronicity, there's a fine line between the two. And sometimes when something is this illogical, you kind of have to identify it as some form of synchronicity. But the story goes, I was at a Red Rock show in Colorado. I was with like a couple homies, or it was one or two homies, and we were there for, was it Lotus? I don't even remember. I've been to too many shows, but it's more about the people to me. I was there with friends, and I brought one of my earliest Peibis. This Peibi still had like cat-like features on its face, like a more of like the cat nose, maintain the rest, the ears, the eyes, the little circle mouth that I use my pencil to create, which is significant, and we'll get into that later on as we get closer to the transition from iconography to Peillustration. But I had this character, and I also had a symbolic boat that I built and painted and created a sail that held the lid propped open, like it wouldn't fold all the way open. It would stay like 2/3 open, and then it would close and fold in on itself. But it was my bass catcher. I've taken it to well over a dozen like festival/concerts to go and catch bass. And for this one concert, I wanted my figure, one of my first significant Peibi figures, to be standing in that boat as if that Peibi was sailing through the ocean of bass, through the ocean of vibrations, literal vibrations. And in order to catch this bass in a significant manner, I held it above my head so it's over everybody's heads in an amphitheater type scenario, so anyone below could easily see. I mean, there's crazy lights going, everyone's going wild, but if you're looking, you will see a little tiny figure standing in a boat type strange looking thing that almost encapsulates the entire psychedelic nature of the setting into one little blip. And I was just, I don't, when I go to these shows, I don't really care how I come across. I probably looked like the most illogical thing, ironically, to anyone surrounding me, but it was my interactions with others that seemed the most illogical. But maybe that's just a reflective experience, like you get what you put out, or what goes around comes around. So as I'm holding this up over my head, like homies are getting J's, passing them along, like entering altered states, although that's not a significant relevance to this. We're just doing our thing. My main thing was to catch this bass, to close it and then carry it into my art process later on, because this boat I then began using, I guess probably as a result of bringing these to shows and catching the bass, I began to use this boat as my mental sailing mechanism, as I journey through my clay work and all of that, where the Peibis are born, or maybe a better word is discovered. I would now use it as my main tool holding vessel. Like in it, I would have all my significant tools that I collected and worked with the most of. And when I'm ready to sail, I open it and begin to build. So in this boat, I have a Peibi. It's standing up tall. I'm just enjoying the show, and then all of a sudden, I see these people racing up towards me from the lower stands, and they seem like they must be going towards somewhere else because they were in a huge rush. But I paid them no mind. I was like, oh, it's the energy of everybody else. Like, don't think too much about it. But it was significant enough where I thought, are they coming towards me? It seems like an emergency. Like, I hope everything's okay around me. Because, I was just focused on my little boat, little guy, having a good time. And then they come right up to me. It was a woman and her partner. And their first question was like, hey, like, what is that? And I'm like, oh, it's my little Peibi. He's it's I don't really know what it means yet. I just know I need to be making these and to invite them into my life and incorporate them in my life and expose them to the world and share them, and this is part of my existence. And they were like, oh, that's so cool, can we look at it up close? And I'm still holding it up over my head, because people just come up and they'll ask me questions, and it could be short, and then they get what they need and they move on. But I don't want that to interrupt my thing. But then they were so interested that I was like, okay, let's have a conversation. I bring it down, I show them the little figure, and I didn't mention this earlier, but that figure had a fishing rod because he was in a boat and he was fishing for bass, for like significant bass lines. And they were like, oh, no way, is he fishing? Like, and does he have like what was it, like a bucket hat? And I'm like, oh yeah, it just felt right. I knew I was going to be taking this one to shows. Again, this is early stage of Peibis. Very primal appearance. I was thinking more about the pattern than the Peibi itself. The Peibi was, I'll go into that later. It's too much detail for the beginning of the show. But it was significant for them. And then they were like, they like asked the Peibi's name, and I was like, oh, this is my Bomberman Peibi, because he had pictures of Bomberman as Millies all over. He was built out of Bomberman Millies from the video game Bomberman. And then they were like, oh, hey, like, what's your name? Like, we've talked about this guy this whole time. Like, who's the guy holding the boat? And I'm like, oh, I'm Dom. And then their eyes lit up. They were like, no way. No way. And looking at each other like, can you believe this? Like, I knew we had to talk to this guy. And her partner's like, I'm glad we ran up here. And then I'm like, dude, like, just thinking like, whoa, what's going on? Like, what did I say? And they were like, oh, well, we came to this show. It's our first show without their friend Dom, who had passed away like weeks prior, or a week or two prior. And they were out there like hoping to find his spirit or something of that essence out at this show. They didn't want to go for a little while because they were in mourning, and then they went hoping to get a sign, I guess from their friend Dom. And they were like, yeah, like, we can't believe like you have the same name as our friend that just passed. And we were kind of looking for him at this show, even though he's not there in his corporeal self. And they were like, yeah, and the reason we freaked out over the fishing rod is he's a big fisherman in this area, and he always wears his bucket hat, and he's a video gamer. And I was just like, dude, what the heck? Like, I was like, I am Dom, and my expression is this essence that was very symbolic to these two people that could almost recognize some significance in a little like 2.5-inch figure from who knows how far they were when they first saw it. But they, like, I couldn't believe the synchronicity. Like, I only knew that I had to bring them to this show. I only knew that they needed a fishing rod and a bucket hat, and it had to be made out of the Bomberman. Like, I everything else was just a leap of faith, and I fell into a cloud of synchronicity. And they were just giving me huge hugs as if I was their friend Dom, or the closest thing they were gonna get to their friend Dom that night. And ever since that altercation, for lack of a better word, I trusted that my art held significant, on some level, a significance to however small of a group of people, that like it'll be exactly what they need. I might only touch like 10, 15 people, but if it's to that degree that these people like had in their life, I would be honored, and I would know that I served my purpose for not just my own process, but the process of a niche of my community. It made me have faith in my art, and my art has always felt illogical or irrational. But when these irrational or illogical or just passionate emotional connections happen through art, I like a singularity happens where I'm like, oh, I could breathe. Like, it amounted to something of significance. Like, this was important to somebody other than myself. It's a connection with the community, and to this day, I make Peibis wondering who this is for. Even if someone owns a Peibi, they might not be the person it's for. It might be someone in their life. Who knows? Or they are the catalyst or the pollinator that will lead it to the space years from now, where they will have that person come up to it and have that experience in a different setting and have their mind blown in a meaningful way that nothing else would have satisfied. And yeah, that's that story. I might have trailed off too long, but it was a lot for me at the moment, and it's a huge inspiration that keeps me going. So to put a huge period or exclamation mark punctuation on that elaborate rambling experience just now, I'm going to close that and transition us to a higher self with this art pun. And it goes something like this. I was going to joke about my broken pencil, but it was pointless. If you know my art process, then you know how hard that hits. My pencil tip must hold the finest degree of sharpness that is possible. An important thing that I don't discuss in this whole process of talking about my work is scale. You don't really see, I don't think it'll show properly. Actually, I think this is pretty much to scale. You don't really see scale with my work, but this piece, which is I think it's just about the scale that we're looking at here with the ruler. Like, I think it might be 10 inches wide, not 9 or 9.5, but this piece is about 10 inches wide, if not a little bit wider, 10.5 maybe. So with that in mind, you can tell how sharp a pencil must be to pull this off. And without that point, symbolically and literally, this is pointless. It's impossible to accomplish this without this point that I honed so carefully And to this day, I do what I can to maintain a more lax relationship, oxymoronically, a more relaxed relationship with this tip or this process of accomplishing such a point, even to the point of the sharpener that I've been using all these years going out of business after 10 years, and their design changing, and me trying to make the most out of my last final sharpener and blade, with help of the newest design, which doesn't sharpen to such a clean point no matter how carefully I sharpen. But if I use both together, I can accomplish the closest thing to. But we'll see how long it lasts, and the farther I get into my Peillustrations, the less I will lean on this process, and I will dive completely into the point of my Peillustrations, and the style will remain as a Elder Scroll historical document that is infused in all future works, regardless of style, regardless of medium, like regardless of subject, regardless of scale. This process and everything that I say is infused in the archetypal structures or character designs that we see now growing and evolving in my Peillustration series, which I'll go into as we finish off the iconography series. That being said, let's get to the point. Here we have a higher self, where I was finding the point of the struggle, or the point, like the sharpness of the struggle, and the hands that held that blade, the ego that was driving me to go through said struggle in order to accomplish some sort of self-satisfaction. And originally, when I first discovered the ego, or that word, outside of the complete stigmatic framing device of, oh, you're being egocentric, or, oh my gosh, you have such an ego, which just completely glides over what ego really means and what it stands for or implies. But it wasn't until I started dating the woman like pictured or illustrated in this piece, like once I started dating her, she was introducing me to all these different writers. I think it was like 2 or 3 different writers that all talked about their relationship with the ego, and different methods of confronting or conversing or ignoring or collaborating with the ego in a healthy way. And it was because she was dealing with such a strong struggle with the way her ego was responding to the influences that induced the cough that I talked about in the last piece, like the stressful situation. Her ego needed to be tamed by something, and that something was this higher awareness of the self being the ego, that identity with the self, that picture of yourself that you try to maintain. And then there's that the super ego, or even higher, that part of yourself that overlooks what your ego is doing, what is important to them, like what process the ego has. And depending on your no, I don't want to say control because that's egoic, but depending on your relationship with your higher self, and the ability you have to hone its own abilities, like that higher self has the ability to have a direct effect on how the ego sees itself from a different perspective. It's almost like you live out your life and you live out this way ignorantly until you come across somebody that makes you reflect. You you hit their wall that kind of stops your inertia, your egoic inertia, and it makes you think of the speed in which you were traveling in that direction, the fragility or the strength of your composition, and what that clash means when you hit this person that is now making you reflect on all of that in a different way, or just at all. And the ego is that part of yourself that goes unconsciously. And then this higher self, the superego, for lack of a better word, is this other party within you that your ego runs up against if you give them the chance to converse, and makes the ego think of itself from a different perspective. And in simple terms, the superego makes you reflect on your egoic patterns that are very unconscious, rooted in subconscious influences, things that echo through subconscious triggers, that you can't really identify, but through your relationship with your higher self, that can look from a bird's eye view of what your lower self is doing with itself. Like, you can attain some level of grace. I keep wanting to say control, but that's very egoic, that control, that very yang energy. And that's why earlier, I don't think I mentioned it, when I have the dragon, like, I always felt like my life, this thing I couldn't control or identify the root of, is like a dragon. And like, that dragon in this case is the ego, and that dragon is always represented, like, the state of that dragon is it's symbolized by the framing device, or the dialogue with these other archetypal figures. Like, in the more yin shade piece, where it's sleeping, that ego is comfortable with itself. It's within the shade of a process, and it doesn't need to act on so much. So it's asleep, it's docile. But then through the puff, the insecurity, like the gasping for air type energy, it's wild and like running into itself and creating knots. It's very yang. But all in all, my pieces, anytime they incorporate the dragon, I'm tapping into the ego, this strong sense of self, this wild creature, this mythical creature that is existence. And in the struggle, we see the two, and also in the pacifier, we see the two dragons, the yin and the yang, the docile and the energetic, meeting to a point at the pinnacle, this higher self, and they seem to resemble vanity mirrors, a point of reflection, or a portal of reflection, literal or symbolic reflection. And in this case, I, through influences of this partner's journey, through her own understanding of herself and things that were helping her identify different facets of herself, I was able to compose a beast that could dominate that dragon. Like, I couldn't think of anything. I didn't foresee, or I couldn't fathom anything stronger than life itself, but that awareness of life is always going to be above. Like, in order to have an awareness of your life, of your patterns, you need to be above it and kind of see the whole topographical map that is your identity, and then dive into it and make an effect, have an influence on how the ego can change, or even I don't even know if it's something that can be destroyed, or if it can only be interacted with in order to hope for a better, more healthy relationship with its power, or its confidence in itself. But here we have the dragon, and it's being pressed up against a similar structure composed of ash textures that I drew directly from images that I took of my own ashtrays, like a stone of ash, like this scholarly stone of ash. And it resembles the same stone that was used in the shade where the tree was growing up against this stone, and the docile, more yin natured dragon was wrapped around and sleeping. So it's kind of an allusion to that intent to inspire a more docile, graceful yin energy, even if it's forced. But like, clearly this is a forced posture. Like, I really wanted my ego to get a hold of itself. Like, dude, like, almost like you're like on top of like a friend who's trying to like hurt somebody else, and you grabbing him by the shirt and you have him like down on the floor, and you're just like, dude, like, wake up. Like, what are you doing? Like that was that friend in myself trying to shake the aggressor awake, and awake to their immaturity, or their aggressive tendencies, like their more unconscious I never know how to say that word, unconscious tendencies, their compulsions, their impulses. So we see this dragon being shoved into this ashtray of a scholar stone, which is a stone of reflecting on the grace of nature and how things erode. And if let be, it will form a very flowy, like, natural form. You just let it be, let it run its course. Don't control it, and it will form as intended. What is that cliche? Go down the path with least resistance, which is, I guess, a phrase about letting go of the reins. So yeah, this, and it's also here we see it's holding this figure that represents me, or a place that I wanted to be, like this ego, and it's a place that I wanted to be, and it was just kind of sleeping, burning down, blowing O's, right in the grip of the ego. You're always within the grasp of the ego. It can always have the ability to take control depending on your relationship with it. But here, I know I'm susceptible to its grip. It can just crush me if the ego wants. But when the ego is distracted or preoccupied with this dialogue with the higher self, you can kind of feel safe within the grasp of the ego's claws, that you can trust the higher self to keep this in check. But it will always be a battle at this stage. You will, and it can happen over and over and over again. But when you are recognizing that your ego's out of control, like you need the higher self to step in and inspire change, it will be a wrestling match where the ego, whether you realize it or not, will be trying to get the higher ground, and the higher self will have to maintain its posture and keep a level of hierarchy, as negative or stigmatic as that word implies, a level of hierarchy where it's like, no, dude, like, know your place, like, you're strong, you're powerful, you can make this whole world burn, but, like, know that you can also be a benevolent power, that you can be something that can use that fire to blow glass, like, to warm a space, to forge steel. Like, it doesn't have to be something destructive. Like this is a friend trying to help a friend out, trying to help the friend not destroy themselves, and in part will salvage your entire existence. They are not two separate things, but two parts of the same whole. So I feel like in this case, this whole piece is the id, the primal state of self, this process, this expression. This dragon is the ego, this form of identity, this central figure of identity, and this powerful being, this powerful mythical beast is the superego. But even higher than that, before you can even, which is part of what these books she was making me read made me think of, is before you can even, like, have this relationship with your higher self, you need to have this intent, this relationship with your intent first, to invite the higher self into the stage. And I didn't recognize that intent until I saw myself as the reader. Like, I had the state of mind, I had the struggle, I had the trials that I was facing. Then I had this book where it plugged in all these familiar trials into the words in tandem with a voice that I was reading, and that voice were patterns that were being downloaded into my mind as solutions, as superegoic solutions to these trials of self-destruction through the ego. But then it was the reader, me as the reader, with the intent for change, the intent for self-awareness and spiritual growth, for lack of better words, to even go through this process, to invite this dialogue with these different parts of myself. And it was the essence intending to read for that purpose, that, like, that reader I chose to represent as the rider, just on another play on words. And I used my partner at the time as a perfect figure who inspired the catalyst for change, inspired me to become that reader for that, with that intention. And in that intention, I wanted her, or that part of me, to hold the weapon, to hold the tool for change, like to hold the power, to hold the reins of this entire experience. Like at the time, I was also rewatching Xena, the Warrior Princess, for the second time. I've watched it 3 times over. I love that show. It's like a show I used to watch when I was younger, when my mom would be away, and I was always like, "Oh, that's my mom," like kind of thing. But Xena is a badass, and I tried to make her kind of resemble Xena, this warrior princess that is in all of us, that is so strong, but is so graceful. Like its strength is through its grace, or it's their intention. Like it was this oxymoronic representation of the yin. Yin is this peaceful figure in my mind, this place of self not self assurance and not self satisfaction, but somewhere in between, where they're very comfortable with themselves. They don't need to inflict anything. They don't need to make anything happen, but it's that intent that is the weapon. That intention is the sword in their hand. And that sword is not a sharp weapon. It won't inflict any pain. In fact, if she was to swing this sword at any of these figures, at the ego itself, this sword would crumble. It's a sword that is halfway lit. Half of this is just ash. And it's just like a doobie that reaches the hilt. So she could slap that intent, but if she makes that damage, it will only in turn destroy the whole intention. Like it's to find peace with oneself. And if you inflict pain instead, then that whole intent obliterates like a halfway lit joint. And you would go to relight that intention, and you would only have half of yourself left. Like it's about maintaining that relationship with this higher self in order to have the domino effect back down to the most primal beast. I've really loved designing this creature. It's made out of all these different sativa nugs, these higher uplifting strains. I just wanted to keep in, like with this whole motif of cannabis, I wanted to maintain this symbolic relationship between the states of mind that would be inspired by the specific strains I was referencing to accomplish these textures, and the particular symbols I was illustrating in each piece. Like this was all indica strains that I would collect, ingest, reference, draw, and I wanted this to recognize it was a lower frequency, that it was it should stone itself, like be stone. Another just play on words, and then these sativas would be a higher being above, like looking from above, like dealing with what is below, and below them is just the ash, where they all will kind of like fall. Like if they burn themselves out in this process, they will merge with the stage that they're playing this on. Like they will crumble into the soil, hopefully to regrow into another opportunity. And above that is the user, the reader, the writer, who is ingesting these or consuming these points of self-reflection, these symbols, these archetypes, these relationships, and is inspiring the intention behind any of these actions. Like it really is the thought that counts. Like your thought will define any action. You could have the most benevolent action, but if you have malevolent intentions it completely shatters like the whole ordeal. And if you have malevolent actions with purely benevolent intentions on a very educational standpoint, where you've considered everything, even if it's not recognized in the moment, it will be recognized in the future as, even if it may never be recognized as benevolent, but in one way or the other, it will spell itself out as benevolent in intent. Like there is a place of grace, whether it's recognized by the entire community or not. Like there is this weird, I don't know if dichotomy is the word, or direct relationship between, or reciprocal nature of your intention and the action. But even further than that, there was this outside force that I couldn't identify. Like that was almost like I identified with this figure on a corporeal existence, and everything that is below them is like a mental experience that I'm going through internally. But even further than that is this representation of the universe or the royal self that we are all, like, is the word entwined in? Like we are all woven parts of this larger self. Like we are all, like it's like the thing that we all relate to with each other, like on a genetic level, on a biological level, on a on a million different levels. Like we all relate to this royal self that we're all facing. Like, and there, like it's like whoever or whatever is the outside force that is overlooking or is responsible in some way for how things are playing out here on this stage is who is represented here through my like, since I am the creator in this case, I'm using the creator's face to symbolize this royal self, using the crown to kind of like allude to that royal self, like the royal me, the royal you, that implies all of us, all of you, all of the me's, like, and they are the one blowing the smoke. They are the one setting the stage. They're the one that like makes the clouds to be interpreted, which again is like the source of my inspiration. I'm a major cloud watcher. All of this style is rooted in concepts that are derived by the nature of cloud watching, the pareidolia in all of us, the nephelococisia that we're all able to do on different levels, like, which is just the most primal biological experience that happens when you interpret anything. Everything is ambiguous until you identify it as such through your interpretation. And this is my own interpretation of an experience, that experience being that cloud that I'm having with myself. And it's up to me to interpret that as any one thing. But the person or entity that is setting the stage, that is to bring it back, folding the wrinkles to be observed, that is building this universe, this social experiment, this human experiment, this spatial experiment. Like, they are the highest self that we are all trying, or hopefully trying to, not identify with, but have a dialogue with in order to play out our role as in sync with the entirety of existence, like to the best of our ability, to do it justice, to play the part that feels right. And this entity is only focused on their creation, just like I at the time am only focused on creating the experience, creating the reflection in as an illusion, like I am to this day folding the shirt to be something of interest. Like that's where this style all came from, like me folding t-shirts, getting more and more interested with density, fitting as much of this experience into one dense composition where I can put as many folded t-shirts into one space. But in the end, like this is only one small woven piece of the giant tapestry that this creature behind all of it, that's behind all of this, is just wrinkling into place for all of us to engage with and interpret. And I have all these breasts in states of grasp and squeeze because they're all trying to get a grip. Like, and in this case, at this very point of this stage, the universe, our creator, is hoping for whatever is in this moment, whether it's me or you in this moment now as we speak, or somebody else in the future. Like, they're hoping that you can get a grip on this substance, like on your roots. Like, and again, whenever I use the breasts as a symbol, it's not out of a immature sexual reference. It is in hopes to identify the root element that we have all consumed as babies, as infants, and grow into the substance that we consume to this day as adults. Even up to your deathbed, like all the things you consume, it's all rooted down to that first drop of milk that you had directly from your lifeline, your bloodline. Like it's this ancient symbol for consumption, and in this case they're hoping that you can get a grip on your relationship with that consumption. Like this is just one titty getting grabbed by this wrestling match. And at this point, I really didn't know who was going to win. It was an even match, like mano a mano, like it was. I didn't know if the ego, like it was a point where I was like reading these things, and I identified these things, but I didn't know who was going to win. I recognized all these parts of myself. I recognized this external force observing this. Almost maybe they're entertained, or it doesn't matter what happens to them. They just put these intentions out there and hope for the best and let it, ride out. They let the ink just spill. So it's funny to see where I am now, as this figure looking in. Almost more, I resemble this figure more now than ever, where I can see this through hindsight. Also, there's this rider that's intact here, who is substantial, who shows her skin, who's real. But then here's the first time I ever displayed any allusion to a rider that guides the ego. and it's at the very bottom. But the rider of the ego's never there. The rider of the ego is up to your imagination. Like, the ego itself is up to your imagination. The idea that anything else other than you has control over your ego is all in your head. So there's this rider that has the dragon on its chest, like blowing the fire on its armor to signify this was the rider of the dragon in my mind. But within the armor, there's only smoke. It's like familiar to the smoke that this creator is blowing. You're like, oh, you're just blowing smoke. Like, it's all imaginary. It's all a facade, which the ego is amazing at creating facades, illusions, that seem real. And this illusionary rider that never existed in the first place is blending in with the ash that this higher self is hoping to throw the ego into to inspire a more docile state. But at the time, I didn't know the best way to have like their relationship. I really didn't know, but there was an intent to have a conversation. But here, it's kind of can start out with the first punch. It's like that one thing where it's like a lot of best friends started out fighting, and then once they got over the fight, they understood each other and they can almost finish each other's sentences, for lack of any other cliche. Like this relationship with myself started out with a fight. But I hope that it wouldn't look as aggressive as it does here, but it's just where it started. And my relationship with somebody who was going through such a deep fight inspired me to see this fight within myself that I was ignoring, and had to see it through another in order to see it through myself, which is something that drives me to create art. Like, in order to, like, when I show myself so transparently, I hope that transparency, that portal, that window that another person looks through via my art, helps them see a part of themselves that they are ignoring. This domino effect. I love the waves of intention crashing up against this epic formation. I feel like this is like all of this is ginormous. Like, this is a giant riding a ginormous, like, tiger that's dominating what is typically a massive dragon on a huge mountain that is peeking through a vast ocean. And then this ocean is built out of all these hands. And before, in the struggle, the hands were bursting, exploding, colliding, just chaos. The intention wasn't there. The intention was loose, and you just hope that it was going to return to the caster. But in this case, this intention is a vast ocean that you can drown in. But when you find the pattern, like, you can find yourself in that intention. And I was drawing these hands, like, acting out the grip. Like, I mean, you'll see, like it almost looks like a wave crashing, like, this grip. And that is the intention, to, like, get a grip on myself. And I was surrounded by that intention, this vast ocean of self-reflection, to get a grip on myself. Again, the clouds in the back, they're all getting a grip on itself. And this caster is blowing the smoke of that intention, and that getting a grip of your self-intention rains down and fills the ocean water, and then they evaporate through the heat of battle back into the sky. And there's this water cycle of self-awareness. And that intention in this case is like they have the hands that are all kind of coming up. Like the intention's like focusing into these moments where it's interacting. That intention is interacting directly with the fight, with the engagement with yourself. And I wanted to paint this picture of how epic that experience is when you finally take down your ego and try to teach it a lesson and build a repertoire with that primal part of yourself that you never thought you could control. I just feel like it should be epic. And like also how insignificant that rider can be once it's off, and you gain a level of control, or just not even control, again, just self-awareness. That self-awareness exposes the facade, like what isn't real in yourself, or what is the most relevant part of yourself worth engaging with, and it tosses everything else into the vast ocean to just be eroded. And I remember how difficult, but also how meditative this whole thing got. Because as I proceeded from left to right, it got more scriptural, like, or typographical, where the lines became almost like letters. Like I was starting to read the intention, like it was getting more clear, like, because it's the same hands over and over and over. They were more blended, and then as I get farther to the right, they become more like scripture, like line, like text that was telling me, dude, like you're making it happen, like you got this, like you're almost there. And I love ambiguous textures. I love finding things that weren't intended. Like I was also experimenting a lot with how building my own pattern and filling those patterns with these textures that have their own pattern, like how it will break apart that and create new shapes and new profiles, and like it gets so wild. Also, to kind of document this level of scale, how important scale was for me, and how like I could see things at this scale. Like just because it's this small, this dense, and this cluster doesn't mean you should overlook it as anything less than infinity. Like I drew this little guy going down on a boat. It's the Peibi on the boat that I mentioned earlier in this podcast. But it's rowing away and down the shrapnel of the ego's body, of the ego's form, I guess, to reach this intention, this ocean, away from the battle. And at the end of this, the tail of the ego is this almost this crying fetal position character that looks like they're just the ash at the tip of a joint, but they're spent and they're disappearing and blending into the fight through this smoke. Like they're going to disappear, while this character has potential, like they're going somewhere. It might be somewhere chaotic at first. It might feel like they're fighting for their lives, but in reality they're fighting for control over their life. And it's difficult. And within that space where they're kind of trying to reach, there are these two other symbolic characters that I rarely point out, but I think for the sake of this discussion, they're important to show, I guess, where I want it to be. And here we have this character sitting closely with this ego rider, not like ignoring their existence, just at most they're just part of the scenery, part of the landscape, and they're kind of just floating over the bob, the bob of the ocean, and watching their higher self just catch this wave of chaos. I don't know if you can see it. Little booty sticking out, hair flowing in the wind, and just cruising. I mean, they're by the rocks, but they're a confident surfer by this point. But I love that relationship where the ego is admiring the higher self, is supporting the higher self, is a supportive role, not clashing, not jealous, not hating in any way. They're like admiring the higher self, and the higher self is coming down that pipeline in order to then support and inspire the ego to play a different part in this play. Couple last things worth mentioning is we have another reference of the Mind Palace. The castle in our minds. The villages referenced in the pacifier. These peaceful abodes of existence, existing within yourself. But also underneath that self is this realm that is undiscovered, this realm that supports you. And that could be your family, your friends, the people that inspire you, your community. It's this realm that holds up what you identify to be yourself. And under it, there's a little boat that doesn't have a rider in it. It's kind of left, and maybe someone parked it, docked it, and they're exploring underneath the surface, which is what it took for me to kind of deal with this battle. I had to kind of get underneath my own skin, and life would get under my skin in order to expose these things that I needed to engage with in order to understand myself deeper. And then there's another guy, it's harder to see here, who's coming out from underneath these caverns of the self, and is coming out to, I guess, maybe even share what they learned. But all right, I think we're golden. That was a pretty hard one to talk about. Like I went through a lot in life in order to go through one end, like this guy over here on the right, and come out the other. Come out the other side with lessons that I could apply. Oh, last thing. You can see this smoke that's trailing off of her weapon that's connected to the frame itself into the void. And the potential energy of this intention can pull in the veil of existence and wipe out this entire fight if it wants to. It's like it could say no to everything if it wants to. That intention holds all the potential energy in the world. That intention can do anything you could set your mind to. And that's what this white of the paper always symbolizes, that potential energy, that infinity that can set the stage for a completely new experience. And I feel like that intention is what teaches the ego the power, or or lack thereof that they have, or to understand their place, because what is above them like can wipe, like, or to not take it for granted, because there is a force that can wipe this all away if it is abused. So this intention can just bring and drag in that smoke, that framing device, and completely cast a white void over all of this darkness. But personally, I wanted to see this play out. I wanted to see what was going to happen. I didn't want to resort to that. All right, on that note, we can now move on to our Peibi Playhouse episode of the week. I don't even know. There really is no chronological expectation to these, but our next Peibi Playhouse episode, I think they're nice, gentle ways to close these episodes, and will become more and more and more relevant as we proceed into the Peillustrations. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed that episode, and until we see each other again, have a great day, have a great night, and have a great time in general. Peace. Huh? Aw, man, again? DMP, DMP, it's another day with DMP, DMP, he's made out of clay. DMP, DMP, the Dutch Master Peibi and friends. DMP, DMP, take the chance and play with DMP, DMP, he's here to stay. DMP, DMP, the Dutch Master Peibi and friends. Damn, Prism, you're right. She's fire. Right, number 7, absolutely savage. This chicken's so good. Wait, number 1, you're still eating cherry chipotle wings? Best believe there was enough for 6 of us. True, true, true. So wait, Prism, did you invite Porcelain over? Nah, this is a friend of number 3. He said she came over with 2 other homies. I think they're downstairs. Well, there were 2 other homies. Wait, when did we get the fireplace?